In the quiet heart of Canterbury, where the mornings smelled of rain and lavender, I thought I had found peace. My name is Liana, and for most of my marriage, I believed I had everything a woman could ask for. A husband who smiled at me every morning, a house that echoed with laughter, and dreams that seemed to fall perfectly in place. Grayson was charming, gentle, and ambitious. He worked at an architecture firm, often coming home with sketches of future buildings he promised would change our lives. I was a teacher, content in my own world of books and children's laughter. Life felt like a slow, graceful dance, each day gliding effortlessly into the next. Friends often told me how lucky I was, how love seemed to live in the way Grayson looked at me across the dinner table. But what no one saw, what I refused to admit even to myself, was the growing silence between our words. Love, I realized later, doesn't vanish in storms. It fades quietly in moments where you stop noticing how often your partner looks away. It began with small things. The phone calls that ended too quickly when I walked into the room, the late nights at the office that turned into excuses about meetings, and the shift in his tone when he said my name. One evening, as I waited with dinner laid out and candles lit, Grayson walked in, his eyes somewhere else. He didn't notice the effort I'd put in, didn't notice me. "You didn't have to wait," he said, glancing at his phone. I forced a smile, pretending not to feel the sting. It was only later, when I picked up his coat to hang it, that I found a faint trace of perfume that wasn't mine. It wasn't the kind of scent that clings by accident. It was deliberate, bold, and foreign. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, every heartbeat whispering a truth I wasn't ready to face. But something inside me began to shift, a quiet awareness that my world was not as whole as I'd thought it was. Days turned into weeks, and Grayson grew more distant. He stopped sharing his dreams, stopped asking about mine. He still smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. I told myself maybe it was work stress, maybe it was temporary, maybe if I tried harder, loved more, things would change. So I cooked his favorite meals, wrote him small notes, and tried to reignite the warmth we once had. But instead of gratitude, I received irritation. "You're overthinking everything, Liana," he snapped one night when I asked if something was wrong. His words cut deep, and I laughed it off like a fool trying to mask her breaking heart. But a woman always knows. The scent of betrayal is something no perfume can hide. The truth revealed itself on a cold Thursday afternoon. I had stayed home that day due to a migraine. Around noon, Grayson's phone buzzed on the table, and before I could stop myself, I glanced at the screen. A message flashed across the lock screen that read, "Can't wait to see you tonight, love." Counting down the hours? My hands trembled as I opened the message thread. There were photos, sweet nothings, and promises that once belonged to me. Her name was Celeste, a colleague from his firm. The woman I had met once at a company dinner. The one who had complimented my dress and smiled too warmly at my husband. I felt my world tilt, the air leaving my lungs in a rush. In that moment, something inside me shattered, but something else woke up too. The kind of calm that only comes when you have nothing left to lose. I didn't cry, not yet. I just sat there staring at the proof of my undoing, realizing that my husband, the man I'd trusted with every piece of me, had already started a new life while I was still fighting for the old one. That night, when Grayson came home, I said nothing. I looked at him, studied the way he avoided my gaze, the subtle guilt that flickered across his face. He kissed my cheek out of habit, and I felt cold. For the first time, I wasn't the naive, hopeful woman he thought I was. I was quiet, observant, patient. I knew confronting him now would only give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. No, I would not give him that. I smiled, asked about his day, and acted as though nothing had changed. Inside, I began crafting something he would never expect. Betrayal may have broken me, but it had also birthed something new. A fire, sharp and steady, burning behind my calm eyes. That night, as I lay beside him, listening to the rhythm of a liar's sleep, I made myself a promise. He thought he had won. He thought I was too weak to fight. But I was just beginning. The following days passed like a play where I had suddenly learned the script while everyone else thought I was still lost in the act. I smiled, I cooked, I kissed him goodbye before work, and all the while I watched. Grayson moved through our home as if it were only a stopover on his way to somewhere else, somewhere she was waiting. I memorized every detail, the lies he told, the shifts in his voice, the way he dressed better on the nights he said he had late meetings. He had no idea that every lie he built was being silently documented by the woman he thought was too fragile to notice. I began saving screenshots of his messages, printing receipts he forgot to hide, and tracking his spending habits. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was clarity. Betrayal had cleared the fog from my life, and yet, beneath the anger, I felt something deeper: grief. Not just for the man I was losing, but for the woman I had been before I learned the truth. Still, I didn't confront him. I knew timing would be my weapon. One evening, Grayson left his laptop open before heading out for what he called a client dinner. I sat down, my hands trembling slightly, and clicked into his emails. My breath caught as I read message after message between him and Celeste. They were not just lovers, they were planning a future together. He was talking about leaving me once he secured a new project that promised a huge payout. In one of his messages, he wrote, "She's too naive to notice anything. I'll give it a few more months before ending things. I need to handle the finances carefully." My vision blurred with rage, but I forced myself to keep reading. That night I realized it wasn't just infidelity, it was betrayal with calculation. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was preparing to discard me after using my stability as a stepping stone. And Celeste, with her polished charm and false sympathy, was in on it. I sat back in my chair, tears running silently down my cheeks. The pain was no longer just heartbreak, it was a quiet awakening. For days after that discovery, I carried on like a ghost haunting her own home. Grayson noticed nothing. He still played the part of a husband when it suited him, occasional affection when he needed to ease his guilt, forced conversations when he sensed my distance. But inside me something had solidified. I was done being his fool. I began making changes that he didn't notice. I moved money from our joint account into one under my name. I started meeting with a lawyer under the guise of school paperwork. Every small step was deliberate, calculated, and calm. At school, I stayed late, claiming extra hours, while in reality, I was gathering evidence, emails, photos, and text logs. My closest friend, Amelia, noticed the change in me. "You're quieter lately," she said one afternoon as we packed up books. I smiled softly and replied, "Sometimes silence is just the sound of someone learning how to fight." She didn't press further. Maybe she knew I wasn't ready to share my secret yet. Then came the night that changed everything. Grayson came home unusually cheerful, humming under his breath as he poured himself a drink. "Good news," he said, his grin wide and confident. "The firm approved my proposal. If this goes through, I'll finally be free." The word free hit me like a slap. He didn't realize what he had just admitted. I raised my glass and smiled. "That's wonderful, love," I said softly. "You deserve it." Inside, my hands were shaking from restraint. That night, while he showered, I stood before the mirror, staring at the reflection of a woman I barely recognized. My eyes had changed. There was no softness left, only resolve. I whispered to my reflection, "You will not be forgotten. You will not be replaced quietly." I slept beside him again, the distance between us no longer painful, it was power. In the weeks that followed, I perfected my plan. I found out that the new project Grayson was working on required significant investment from his firm, and his personal reputation was on the line. Any scandal, any bad publicity could destroy it. That was my opening. I arranged an anonymous meeting with one of his firm's partners through an old university contact. Carefully, I fed information about Grayson's ethical lapses, suggesting that his personal conduct might risk the company's name. I never mentioned his affair directly, just enough hints to make them curious. Soon, rumors began to swirl around the office. I watched him from a distance as stress started showing on his face. He didn't know where it came from or why things were suddenly going wrong. The man who once thought he had control over everything began to crumble under invisible pressure. I moved through each day with a quiet satisfaction, never revealing my hand. But revenge, I learned, is a slow burn. It doesn't end with their downfall. It ends when they realize it's you holding the match. The night after the confrontation was eerily silent. The house that once echoed with laughter and whispered dreams now felt like a hollow shell filled with unspoken words. Grayson had left early that morning for business, though I suspected it was another one of his secret meetings. I sat in the dimly lit kitchen, staring at the untouched breakfast, the ticking clock sounding louder than ever. Each second that passed stretched into eternity, reminding me of how my life had become a waiting room for disappointment. I couldn't understand how the man who once looked at me like I was his world now barely acknowledged my existence. But that night, something inside me shifted, not in anger, but in clarity. I realized that love, when one-sided, becomes a quiet kind of death. I decided to start documenting everything. His late-night calls, his unexplained absences, even the subtle changes in his tone whenever I asked about work. It wasn't about proving his betrayal anymore. It was about protecting myself from the storm I knew was coming. I reached out to my old college friend Clara, a lawyer who had always told me, "Never let emotions blind your strategy." Her words echoed in my head as I drafted a plan, not of revenge, but of liberation. I began to gather every financial document, every piece of correspondence tied to Grayson's company, and stored them discreetly in a folder hidden inside a false drawer under my desk. One afternoon, while searching through his study for a document he had asked me to find, I stumbled upon a file labeled Project Horizon. My heart pounded as I opened it and discovered offshore bank statements, illegal transactions, and forged signatures, including mine. He wasn't just cheating emotionally. He was using my name to cover his crimes. My hands trembled as I pieced it together. Grayson wasn't just unfaithful. He was dangerous. He had built an empire of deceit, and I was unknowingly part of it. I sat there for hours, my body frozen between rage and disbelief. Every memory of him, every kiss, every promise, now felt like a scene from someone else's life. When he returned that night, his usual charm replaced by an edge of arrogance, I could barely look at him. He poured himself a drink, loosened his tie, and casually asked if dinner was ready. I wanted to scream, to throw the evidence in his face, but I stayed silent. Instead, I watched him, every gesture, every smirk, as if I was studying the man I was about to destroy. Because now I had leverage. I knew his secret, and I knew he would never expect me to fight back. As he went upstairs, leaving his glass half full, I whispered to myself, "You built your lies on my name, Grayson. Now I'll reclaim it, piece by piece." That night, I couldn't sleep. The weight of what I had discovered pressed against my chest like a heavy stone. I could hear the faint sound of his breathing from the next room, calm, steady, unbothered, while my mind raced with plans. Clara's voice echoed again, "Be patient. Timing is your weapon," and so I waited. I began making copies of every document, transferring them to a secure drive hidden in my office at work. I also changed the passwords to our joint accounts, quietly moving my share of the money into a separate account he didn't know existed. Days turned into weeks, and my silence became my greatest disguise. Grayson thought I had given up, that I had accepted my place as the quiet wife who didn't ask questions. He had no idea I was orchestrating the end of his empire from within his own home. Every morning, I played the role of the loving wife, smiling through the lies, cooking his meals, and nodding as he spoke about business trips. But behind that calm facade, I was dismantling everything he had built. One evening, I followed him quietly, unnoticed, to a high-end hotel on the outskirts of town. I sat in my car across the street, my heart pounding as I watched him meet a woman at the entrance. She was tall, elegant, and far too comfortable in his arms. I took photos, recording every moment, every kiss, every deceitful smile. As I watched them walk inside, I felt a strange calm wash over me. Not the kind that comes from peace, but from power. The kind that comes when you finally stop being the victim and start becoming the author of your own fate. When I returned home that night, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were tired but sharp, no longer clouded by love or confusion. I realized that the woman staring back at me wasn't broken anymore. She was becoming something new, something stronger, quieter, and far more dangerous than the naive girl who once believed in forever. Grayson had no idea what was coming, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The morning sun spilled through the curtains, soft and golden, but it felt like an illusion, a cruel trick of nature to make everything look peaceful when my world was anything but. I stood by the window, sipping coffee I could barely taste, watching Grayson drive away in his expensive black sedan. I had memorized the pattern of his lies by now, the way he always adjusted his cufflinks before leaving, the fake phone calls he made just loud enough for me to overhear. But this time, I wasn't just watching him go. I was letting him believe he still had control. Because what he didn't know was that every move he made now led him closer to the edge I had prepared for him. That day, I went to meet Clara. We sat in a quiet cafe near the city's legal district, the hum of conversation around us muffled by the tension between us. I handed her the folder, copies of every forged signature, every secret transfer, every incriminating email. She flipped through the documents, her expression darkening with every page. "He's in deep," she murmured. "These aren't just corporate tricks, Olivia. He's laundering money under your name. If this goes public, he'll try to drag you down with him." I nodded, my fingers tightening around the edge of my cup. "Then we won't let it go public, not yet. We'll let him think everything's fine until he's standing on nothing." We spent hours drafting a plan. Clara would connect me with an investigator who specialized in financial fraud, someone discreet and ruthless. Meanwhile, I would play my part at home, keeping Grayson calm, making him believe I was still the trusting wife he thought he'd broken. That night, when he came home smelling faintly of perfume and champagne, I greeted him with a smile. "Rough day?" I asked softly. He nodded, barely looking at me, and went straight to his office. I followed a moment later, pretending to bring him tea, but in truth I wanted to see if he noticed the subtle shift in me. He didn't. And that was his first mistake. Over the next few weeks, I built a web around him, invisible threads that tightened every time he lied. I tracked his movements, his meetings, his spending habits. The investigator, Mr. Hale, worked quietly in the background, uncovering hidden properties, false accounts, and shell companies that all pointed back to Grayson's empire of deceit. Every night I went to bed beside him, pretending to sleep while he texted in the dark. Sometimes I'd catch fragments of his whispered calls. "She's still clueless. Yes, I'll handle her soon." He thought he was playing me. He had no idea that the moment he said, "handle her," I recorded his words. Evidence, proof, a ticking time bomb waiting to detonate. Then came the charity gala, a glittering evening meant to show off his success and charm the investors he had been fooling for months. I wore the red dress he loved, not for him, but for the symbolism, the color of power, the color of danger. As we entered the ballroom hand in hand, I could feel every pair of eyes on us. He basked in the attention, shaking hands, laughing too loudly, acting like the king of the world. But beneath that flawless mask, I could see the cracks, the nervous flicker in his eyes whenever someone mentioned audits, the way his jaw tightened when reporters approached him. He was unraveling, and I was holding the final thread. Halfway through the night, as the lights dimmed for the charity announcement, Clara appeared at the edge of the room, giving me a subtle nod. Everything was set. The documents had been sent to the board of directors, the investors, and the authorities, all scheduled to arrive the moment Grayson stepped on stage. As he raised his glass to make his speech, his phone buzzed. I watched his face drain of color as notification after notification lit up his screen. He stuttered mid-sentence, the smooth charm slipping into confusion. "Is everything all right, Mr. Moore?" Someone called from the crowd. He forced a smile, but I could see the panic behind his eyes. He excused himself abruptly and disappeared into the hallway. I followed, my heels clicking softly against the marble floor. I found him in the corridor, pacing, his phone pressed to his ear. What do you mean the accounts are frozen? Who leaked? He stopped when he saw me. His expression shifted from fury to disbelief. You, he said quietly. You did this. I met his gaze, calm and steady. You built your empire on my name, Grayson. It was only fair I took it back. He lunged forward, grabbing my wrist, his grip tight and trembling. Do you have any idea what you've done? He hissed. I didn't flinch. Yes, I said, pulling my hand free. I've set you free from your lies, your empire, and me. The police arrived minutes later, led by Mr. Hale. They had warrants, documents, and years of evidence, all pointing to Grayson's crimes. He tried to plead, to deny, to charm his way out, but this time, there was no escape. As they led him away in handcuffs, flashes from cameras lit up the hallway like lightning. The same people who once admired him now whispered in disgust. I stood still, my heart pounding, not with guilt, but with relief. He turned one last time, eyes full of betrayal. You'll regret this, he spat. I smiled faintly. No, Grayson, you will. That night, I returned home to silence. Not the cold, heavy silence of despair, but the peaceful kind that comes after a storm has finally passed. I sat by the window, the city lights flickering in the distance, and for the first time in years, I felt weightless. Everything he'd taken from me, trust, dignity, peace, I had reclaimed in a single night. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't over yet. Because men like Grayson don't go down quietly, and if he ever came back to reclaim what he'd lost, he'd find that the woman he once controlled no longer existed. The days that followed Grayson's arrest felt strangely quiet, as if the entire world had paused to catch its breath. News outlets ran the story nonstop. Business tycoon arrested for fraud. Wife exposes financial empire built on lies. My name was in every headline, but for once, it wasn't tied to his shadow. It was my story, my strength, my survival. Yet, in the quiet hours of dawn, when the city still slept, I would sit by the window and wonder if justice ever truly felt complete. Revenge had a taste, bitter, satisfying, yet strangely hollow. But I wasn't empty. I was free. And freedom, I was learning, came at the cost of everything you thought you needed to survive. One evening, about 2 weeks after the arrest, I got a call from Clara. He's been granted bail, she said cautiously. My hand froze midair. I had expected it, but hearing it out loud made my chest tighten. He's out? I asked quietly. For now, she replied. But the case is airtight. He can't run far, and he knows it. I thanked her and hung up, feeling the familiar ripple of unease crawl through me. The house, once a symbol of wealth, now felt like a cage with too many memories. Every corner still held traces of him, his cologne, his voice, his ghosts. But I refused to run. I had fought too hard to get here. That night, the rain came. It was relentless, hammering the windows as thunder rolled across the city. I was reading in the living room when the lights flickered and went out. For a moment, the world plunged into silence, except for the steady hum of rain. Then I heard it. A faint creak near the back door. My heart skipped. I reached for the small flashlight on the table and aimed it toward the sound. The beam caught a shadow, tall, still, waiting. You shouldn't have done it, Olivia. His voice came from the darkness, calm but sharp, cutting through the rain. Grayson, I said softly, keeping my tone steady even as my pulse raced. He stepped into the light, drenched, disheveled, eyes burning with something between anger and desperation. You destroyed everything, he said, his voice trembling with fury. My company, my reputation, you humiliated me. I stood, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. You did that to yourself, I replied. I just showed everyone what you really were. He laughed bitterly, a hollow sound that echoed in the dark room. You think they care about you now? They'll forget you, but me, they'll always remember me. He took a step closer, and for the first time, I saw something behind the rage, fear. His empire had crumbled, his allies had turned away, and all he had left was the pride he wore like armor. You should have walked away, he whispered. I gave you everything. My voice hardened. You gave me a prison, and I walked out of it. His jaw tightened, his hands shaking slightly. You won't win, he hissed. You think the law will save you? I still have people, connections. I smiled faintly. And I have truth. It's louder than your lies ever were. At that moment, flashing blue lights illuminated the windows, sirens cutting through the rain. Clara's plan had worked perfectly. She'd been tracking his movements since his release, expecting he might come for me. He turned toward the sound, panic flickering in his eyes. You called them? He asked, stepping back. No, I said softly. But I knew you'd come. The door burst open, officers flooding in. They surrounded him, shouting commands. He resisted, shouting my name, cursing me, but it didn't matter anymore. The man who once controlled every room now stood powerless, soaked and broken, as they dragged him away for the final time. When the door closed and the rain began to ease, I sank to the floor, trembling. The storm outside mirrored the one that had finally passed inside me. Clara arrived minutes later, wrapping a coat around my shoulders. It's over, she whispered. I looked up at her, tears mixing with rainwater. No, I said softly. It's just beginning. She frowned, unsure what I meant, but I did. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding what I had lost, trust, hope, and myself. The woman who once lived for someone else's approval was gone. In her place stood someone unbreakable. Months passed, and life slowly returned to something that resembled peace. I sold the house, every inch of it haunted by the echoes of lies, and moved into a small apartment overlooking the river. I started writing again, something I had given up years ago because Grayson said it was a waste of time. Now, my words poured freely, raw and real, about survival, betrayal, and the strength of silence. People reached out to me, sharing their own stories of pain and healing. In their words, I found reflection. In their courage, I found purpose. One afternoon, as I walked along the riverside, I saw a father playing with his little girl, her laughter echoing through the crisp air. For a moment, I felt something stir inside, not regret, but gratitude. I had faced the fire and walked through it, and though the scars would never fully fade, they reminded me of how far I'd come. I stopped by the water's edge, watching the sunlight ripple across the surface. The world moved on, indifferent yet beautiful. I took a deep breath and whispered, "Goodbye, Grayson." The wind carried the words away, scattering them like ashes. And for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of his name. I turned and walked away, each step lighter than the last, ready to begin again, not as someone's wife, not as someone's victim, but as Olivia Moore, the woman who rose from the ruins and found her own power. And maybe, just maybe, that was the truest victory of all. If this story touched your heart or kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to hit the like button. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think about Olivia's journey and the choices she made. Would you have done the same in her place? And if you enjoy emotional, powerful stories like this one, filled with betrayal, justice, and redemption, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next story. Your support means everything. Every view, like, and comment helps keep these stories alive. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes silence is the strongest revenge of all.